welcome to the Start to Nine podcast with me, a slightly raspy Rich Lee. I hope you enjoyed the last episode. I hope you're enjoying season 2. I feel like we are on a roll. And today's episode is slightly different. It's not just speaking to somebody about who they are, why they are who they are. We are getting into an enormous topic, and that is the topic covered in an Amazon best-selling book called The Anxious Generation, written by Jonathan Haidt with his lead researcher, Rausch. Today, Zach and I are talking about incredibly important things, namely our children and future generations and what the hell we are doing to them, what we're doing with smartphones and social media and children as young as 9. 45% of children aged 9 have a smartphone. We overprotect in the real world and underprotect in the digital world. That is the message of Jonathan and Zach in The Anxious Generation, and they've been on a global tour, a media tour, talking about the book and the 4 things that they think can fix this. And when I say fix this, it is an increased incidence of ill mental health in not just children, but let's talk about children, particularly teenage girls. There's the pandemic, if you will, of ill mental health that spiked around 2008 to 2010. And there's just been an uptick ever since. And I think, and Zach and Jonathan conclude that we are past the point of this being correlation. We are past the point of saying, oh, maybe it's social media and smartphones. We're at the point where there is a causation here. We can see suicidal ideation, self-harm, ill mental health, episodes of depression, all of these things, hospitalization, all of these things. And not just the sharp end of it as well, not just those things, the difficult end, but just, malaise and ill mental health in general. We can see it, and we're doing this. You would not give your kid a toy if a third of people that played with that toy would then suffered some ill effects as a direct result. That toy wouldn't even be on sale, and yet that's what we're doing. We exist with and around society, and all that's happening is we're being further alienated by the technology that is supposed to be helping us. And it's not to say that the technology is the devil and that we need to do away with it entirely. It's to say, let's help it to help us. Let's take control of this. It's spiraling. We're not ready for it. And I think so many of my friends that are parents, so many people I know feel like they're losing control. It's a losing battle. Now, my kid says they need this because otherwise they're going to be left out. Well, we need to try and take some control back. We need to wrestle some control and some boundaries back. And for ourselves, for ourselves as much as for our children. So this isn't a think of the children, 1980s, 1990s moral panic episode. It's incredibly important that we at least consider this, because this is killing people. And if it's not killing people, it's making them actively more unhappy. And why would we do that? Why wouldn't we take a step back? We're just going to keep plodding forwards, are we? So, important conversation. Appreciate Jonathan and Zach's work on this, and I hope you do too. As a parent of 4 myself, 3 daughters, I worry for their futures. I really do. I think, as people get further into social media and further socially isolating themselves, and we allow that, can you think of a more perfect hotbed for depression and unhappiness than a darkened room with a child on their phone, feeling like they're missing out, comparing themselves unfavorably to other people for hours and hours and hours a day, where issues at school follow them home? Can you think of a better way? In prison, what happens when somebody, when they want to truly punish somebody? Or in history, what happened when they truly wanted to punish somebody? You go into social isolation. They send you to an island, or they put you in a padded room all by yourself. They send you to solitary. I don't know the answers, but Zach and Jonathan are prompting an incredibly important conversation that I was proud to have. I think we get into some powerful, powerful places. So I hope you enjoy, and leave your thoughts. Feel free to find us, Start a Nine Show, Start a Nine Podcast on social media, and tell us what you think. It's a good one. So, all of that being said, all that remains to be said is, without further ado, I bring to you my conversation with NYU lead researcher on the anxious generation, Zach Rausch. Enjoy.
Hello, hello. Hey, good morning, Zach. How are you doing?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Rich, for having me on. And it's an honor. And hello to all your listeners. And I'm ready to talk.
Thank you very, very much. Zach, I said to you before we started recording that I think this might end up being one of the most important conversations I've had on this podcast to date. We've typically spoken to individuals about their lives, careers, all of those things. I called it the starting line because it's all about where we start from. We all start from somewhere. That's what you do with that. But also, for me, this is the first time I get to tick the box of the starting line of curiosity and intellectual curiosity and understanding an issue, a problem. And I think and hope that by the end of this, people understand a lot more about why the book that you've contributed to, that you've done a lot of research in and around the anxious generation, is necessary. But Zach, before we do all of that, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a tiny bit about you.
Sure. Yeah. So I am an associate research scientist at New York University and the lead researcher to the social psychologist at NYU. His name's Jonathan Haidt, and he's written a bunch of books. But I helped write The Anxious Generation, which is a book that is trying to help explain what happened to young people right around 2012, 2013. But I guess before going into the book, I could tell you a little bit
Tell me about you.
Great. Yeah, so my story with John starts in graduate school, but my story to that point started much earlier. So when I was 18 years old, I was on a gap year program traveling through South America. And while I was there, I was unknowingly given a really strong hallucinogenic drug. And when that happened, my brain fell apart. And
what was it? What was the drug?
It's called ayahuasca.
Oh, ayahuasca.
Yeah. So I didn't know I was being given it. And before that, I'm Jewish, so the only experience I really had with substance was a little bit of wine on Shabbat, on the weekend.
Right.
So I was just totally unprepared for that.
Who gave you that?
It was an Ecuadorian.
You don't have to name names, but
it was a shaman. We had a shaman come to our group, give a ceremony, and he gave us this. He brought this big pot with him, full of this mysterious liquid, and I was like. He asked if anybody wanted to try it, and I said, let me try it. And
what did you think it was?
I had no idea. I knew it was something, but I took it, and later that night, I had this experience where I was sitting outside, and I heard two of my roommates start to get into a huge fight together, and I got really freaked out, and I didn't know what was happening. And then I go back into the room and I asked my friend, what the heck just happened? And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then, eventually I realized I hallucinated the whole thing. But when that happened, I was so convinced that I knew that I thought it was real. And when I realized that it wasn't, it was when I had the first panic attack of my life. And this is the broader point is it set off about a decade where I really struggled with mental health problems, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation,
Okay.
You can go down the list.
But when were you born? What year were you born? So how old are you?
1994. So I'm 29.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Got it.
And so anyways, my experience from that point all the way to college was about trying to understand, how our brains work and how they can so quickly kind of derail themselves. And then
so you took a real analytical approach to this. You thought, okay, I've seen what something can do to me and then how that possibly impacts me for a period of time. And you thought, I need to understand this.
Yeah. Well, it took a while to get there. I first, I did everything. Therapy. I started working with, I did a lot of wilderness expedition stuff and out in the wilderness. And then I started leading trips in wilderness therapy with adolescents who were struggling. But yeah, eventually I got to a point where I realized that I didn't want to just work with people who are struggling. I wanted to really understand how our brains work and why and how kind of our environment deeply shapes us. And so my experience with ayahuasca, I think, helped me to this book. And so when I got to grad school, I read John's work, and he was trying to understand that, like, college students all over the US are flooding the mental health centers. They're coming in with anxiety, depression. It was just like came out of nowhere, it felt like. And at the time, nobody knew what was happening. And I thought it was just captivating. And so I wrote up did some research and blog posts on the book. And that's how I started working with John. And all of that led me to start working on this book because my first project was to try to understand, is this just an American phenomenon of what's happening to kids, or is this happening in different countries around the world? So I spent about 2 years trying to answer that question. And what I found is that this is happening not just in the US, it's happening all across the English speaking world, the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. It's happening across Scandinavia, the places where people think mental health is like amazing, but they've been really struggling over the last decade. And a lot of areas of Western Europe, I've found the same trends. And so as we were kind of building this story and realizing just the scale at which this is happening, it really led us to this book, which is about what happened to young people just about a decade ago. And I'll just give you the core thesis now, and we can talk more about it. And
I've got
also,
so much to ask.
yeah, is that there was a kind of a backstory, which is that we were overprotecting kids in the real world, and has been happening since the 80s and then really accelerated in the 90s. And that fully came to like full force in right around 2010, where what we used to have was a play-based childhood where kids were outside, often unsupervised, playing with other kids in mixed age friend groups. And I'll really go into in a little bit why that's so
Mm.
valuable. But that play-based childhood, for partly the overprotection and also other reasons, ended. And then it got replaced with what we call the phone-based childhood, where kids moved into a new digital universe that is really hostile to human development. And we call that the phone-based childhood. And so the core thesis is that we've been overprotecting kids in the real world and underprotecting them online. And that's what's been driving this crisis. And that's also how we're going to turn things back around in our view.
So a lot of people talk about this as a correlation causation issue. How can you prove that this is, and especially people that don't want to hear that maybe phones, social media, the advent of the iPhone, or, of smartphones in general, has a link to this. They don't want to hear it. How do you, what do you say to those people that say that, this is a causation issue rather than, we can definitively now say this is causation rather than correlation?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there is a lot of debate still among different researchers who take different positions than John and myself. But this is the way that we think about this issue. The first is that we're not saying the decline in mental health is related to one thing. What we're saying is that we have systematically transformed child development through taking away this play-based childhood and replacing it with a phone-based childhood. And so our our argument is multi-layered, and it requires a lot of different pieces to fit together. And so that's just to set the stage that it's multi-causal. But what we can say for certain now is that there is a growing consensus that there's at least a correlation, right? That heavier social media use is related to worse outcomes, depression, anxiety, loneliness, and particularly, and this is important, is what often gets missed is we look, what is the relationship between these things among all adults or among
Mm.
all
Well,
people everywhere,
Zach,
right?
do
And
you know what? The least happy people I know are the most online people. And do you know, and I say that with love for those people, the people that are, the whole extremely online, I'm extremely online. And then, without delving into stuff I'm sure we'll get onto, but, I also find those people are the most likely to self-label. the most likely to, get into those intersectional kind of, ever smaller groups of self-identification. And I think a conversation with you is important to understand that, because I think it's important to come to this with kindness, with an understanding, and an empathy. And I know certain other authors that have tried to look at exactly this, have possibly come at it from a more aggressive, finger wagging, moral panic type situation. That's not what we're doing. I think it's important this is happening now, that your book comes out now, and that across the ocean, across the world, we can start to look at this and fundamentally take a step back as parents, as brothers of teenagers, sisters of all of these family members of, and actually understand what's happening and what we can do about it. Because I talk often about the fact that I don't think we're evolved enough to understand the implications of social media and just perpetual social media use. And I say that as 36-year-old that more or less grew up with social media. Facebook came in, I think, what was it, 2004? I think that's when it was launched. So my teenage kind of life wasn't impacted by, I still had it was a Nokia 3310. That was my first phone. It was like the Motorola Razr was the cool phone when I left school, or when I was 15, 16 at school. So it's understanding, okay, what's happening now? Let's put words to it. Let's put facts and figures to it, and look at what we can actually do about it. Because the most important thing for me is this isn't just fearful. Do you remember like MTV bashing, kind of, you're going to ruin our child, you're going to ruin our children. Video games are the devil. Grand Theft Auto is going to, ruin my child's life. Mothers against type, protesting. This isn't that. This is more, oh, actually, this is killing people. And let's call it what it is. People are ill mental health as a result of, or correlated to, or caused by this, is damaging for individuals and families, and and wider society. I think we can't put too fine a point on how impactful social media is and can be on not unformed but forming minds.
The key idea that I wanted to make sure that readers know, or listeners know, is that it's specifically when we look at adolescents and adolescent girls, and this is when the effect of social media seems to become much, much stronger in the research. And one of the issues is just that we're looking a little bit too broad, and it's like we're trying to use a microscope to look into space, but it's super blurry. We can't see what's going on. But when we start to fine tune the lens, the effects become much clearer. And we see it across many different kinds of studies, correlational up through experimental studies. We also see that, from the Facebook internal research themselves, we have numerous documents showing, for example, they found that just about 1 in 3 teen girls say that Instagram makes their body image worse. And this is from their own internal research. We have research from Australia asking, what's the reason for your generation or the youth mental health crisis? Number one answer, social media. So we have young people saying it. We have parents saying it, teachers saying it, companies saying it. We have dozens and dozens of studies, and we collate all of that on our website, anxiousgeneration.com/reviews. You can see all of this. And so the evidence is building, and we really think that there is a very important story to be told here about the way that the phone-based childhood is really impacting young people, and impacting their capacity to thrive as adults. And yeah, I don't want to be alarmist, but my big picture point is we need to think about, if there's any consumer product designed for kids, if you knew that, you go to Toys R Us, or I don't know what you have in
Yeah.
in the UK, but
Oh God. It's like Toys R Us fell over a few years ago, and everybody's devastated. It just it went bankrupt here or something. And we've got a few at the Smiths and the
Yeah.
Entertainer and things like that. But
just imagine,
not as
right?
good.
If you go to that store and they had a product that you could pick up for your kid, and on the label it says, there's a chance that between 5 and 15% of the users of this toy might develop some sort of thing that looks like an addiction. And it could really exacerbate anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicide. Like, why? Why would we be okay with that? Right.
Yeah.
And this is the point that we're making. It's not going to impact every kid the same way, but it's absolutely insane that we have consumer products for children that are being sold that h- are really di- like problematic for their own well-being.
Mhm.
And the benefits really just do not seem to outweigh those costs.
I think one of the things, so I listened to Jonathan talk about the book on Rogan, and he talked about the or actually it might have been on the I'm listening to the audio book, so I might just be remembering his voice, but talked about how when we think about accidents in cars, what's the solution to that? It's seatbelts. When we think of the potential damage from gambling, it's regulating that industry and in some cases making it illegal to gamble. Smoking. Cigarettes used to be available from vending machines and very, very easily accessible. I remember being at school and it was kind of just shopkeepers would turn a blind eye to people buying cigarettes and things like that. Now that's changed enormously. You've even got some countries, I forget if it's New Zealand or Australia, that you know have essentially tried to ban cigarettes out of existence, right? As children get older. So guardrails are put in place for things that are dangerous and that we recognize as being dangerous for children. So what are your hopes and what are your, I guess, guardrails? What is your seatbelt, for this situation?
What we propose in the book is four major reforms that we can make. Now, every country is going to be different here. There's a role that the government can play, but what we really want to focus on right now, as we're just really launching this movement, is what can parents do, what can teachers do,
Mhm.
what can young people do, and there's a lot. So, what we propose are four norms. The first is if you have young kids and they don't have a smartphone yet, it's delay, delay, delay. So delay until age 14 in the US, it's after middle school,
Mm.
because that period of early puberty is really where the harm seems to be greatest. So if we can
Right.
get through that period and set a norm, right? No smartphones till 14. We can give kids flip phones, like you were saying before, like you had,
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
yeah, they're very different devices. You can still communicate. They're communication devices. They're not platforming devices
Mm.
where we are platforming ourselves to the world to be
That's right.
judged. So delaying is our number one thing. Number two is if we can delay social media up to 16. And this really could be supported through government regulation. Our third reform are really phone-free schools, and the UK is actually
Mm.
pushing on this, where we
Trying.
really want to see, trying to get phones out of the school day, right? Like having it in your backpack, having it in your pocket is just not going to do it, because these devices, they're pinging you all day long. They are extremely distracting and they're designed to keep you back on it and to keep you there.
Mhm.
And so we need to get these out of the school day, and that can give us 7 hours, give kids 7 hours of a childhood back. And the last thing, which is the other side of the story, which is about the overprotection, is giving kids more opportunities for free play, independence, and responsibility in the real world. Now, I want to set I should have said this
Yeah,
before,
I can
but
talk about each of those. I didn't want to interrupt
yeah,
you. So yeah. Yeah.
what I
Cool.
wanted to, say at the outset here is the most important aspect of all of these reforms is that we do not think that they should be done individually, because individually, it's going to be really difficult. And in some cases, they may backfire a little bit. So let me just explain. So as a parent, you probably have a kid who is going to ask for, I want to get onto Instagram. Please let me
Mhm.
get onto Instagram. Why? All of my friends are on
Everybody
there
else's.
and they're spending all of their time on there. And if you say no as a parent, right, you are making a really tough choice, which is that they have to be disconnected from their friends. And as a kid, to decide themselves that I'm going to restrain myself from this because maybe I might eventually be harmed by it, that's a hard calculation to take. And so what ends up happening is that everybody's stuck in a trap. Everybody's on these platforms because everybody else is on there. And so what we need to do is to break out of the trap. And the way to do that is to work together. And so our biggest recommendations for all of these reforms is, hey, I'm going to talk to the parents of my kids' friends. We're going to team up together, delay till 14. And then we're going to, with these kids, they're going to spend a lot of time together. We're going to let them play together, let them have some unsupervised free time. We really believe this is only going to work when we change norms together. And I think that will be very powerful.
I think let's go through those in
Yeah.
order. The first one, I don't know if you know, in the UK, secondary school starts at 11. So you have your primary school, 4, 5 through to 11. So you finish in year 6, you start year 7 when you're 11. That is the age at which most children, and including mine, are given a mobile phone. And the generalized reason, and of course it's a smartphone because it's hard, rare to buy anything other than. The generalized reason is for reasons of safety. And that's what the kid, that's what you first begin that, I guess that process with is, well, they're going to be getting the school bus or they're going to be walking to school. I want to know they're safe. I want to know they're okay. They need to be able to contact me. And it's also giving them some responsibility. It's, they're growing up. They're not just primary age school children anymore. They're secondary school. Let's give them a tiny bit more responsibility. And that's, I don't know the statistics for it, but I would imagine it's the vast majority of kids here in the UK have a phone at or by 11.
Ofcom research found 91% of children in the UK have a smartphone by the time that they are 11, and 44% when they're 9. Yeah,
it's 44% by 9. So almost, we're getting on for half of children by 9. And again, it is that person has it, so I'd like it. And the worst thing you can do as a child, social suicide for a child, is to be alienated, right? Is to be othered, exactly. to be different at that point before you've even had a chance to get to secondary school and stake your claim as to who you're going to be and how you fit into a social group and peer group. So the last thing you need or want is to be the kid, there with the, with the faded blazer or the faded jumper, and and I don't have that phone because my parents are weird. You can imagine the kind of approbation, the social issues that kid might face, which is, what, your parents hippies, like, you weird. That's kind of where it starts, right? Is where kids are like, oh, you're not normal if you don't have that. So I mean, how do you tackle a child that says, yes, but I'm going to be, they won't use this term, but othered if I don't have that? And your point is, if enough parents stand up to it, right? I think I read or heard, you think that if only a third of parents did this, then you've got the ability to say, well, actually, and I've got 3 children now, 4 soon to be. If you say, well, actually, that friend doesn't have one, that friend doesn't have one, I know they don't because I know their parents.
Exactly.
And one of the most interesting aspects of the book so far that I've got to is, children understand the damage that these things are having. And again, I want to get through all 4, but children understand the damage and the implications of the negative implications on them of social media, to the point where you say, hey, if we took this away, would you be happy? They say no. And they say, well, what if nobody else could use it? And then there's a breath of relief, and they think, yeah, actually, that could potentially be quite beneficial for me. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So there's this extraordinary study done just last year where this wasn't among teens, but it was among college students. And what they did in this experiment is they asked 2 different questions. They said, the researchers said to the participants, how much money would it take for us to give you, for you to get off of TikTok or Instagram for a month? And the answer that they said was, right around $50. And what that's signaling, right, is that that there's some value to it. They're like, I want this thing, you got to pay me for it. And then they said, all right, same question. How much money to get off of Instagram or TikTok for a month? But we're going to get everybody else in your community off of it. How much would it take? And they actually let the scale go down, not just to 0, but into the negative numbers. And that's where it was. And so what that means is the participants were saying, here, take $20. I'm going to pay you to do this. And so what the point of that study is just that it really reflects that kids, teens, even young adults are stuck in this trap where In many ways, they don't want these products to exist, but they can't coordinate together to get off of it. And this
Mm.
is what the role of governments really are for, is to solve what are called collective action problems. This is what this is, that if any individual tries to make a change, the cost is kind of high. But when we do it together, cost goes down, benefits increase. That's what we're facing. Um, so we just need to work together to get out of that.
So that speaks to point one, which is no phones before 14. Point two, no social media before 16. It's harder because social media, I spoke to my niece yesterday. She turned 13 yesterday. And she said, but you don't need, I can just say I'm 13, even before I was. I've been on this for years. I can be on this for, the guardrails are so, I mean, they don't exist because you can just tick a box. It says, yes, of course I am, in a way that children, of course, will. I mean, I've got with my son now, so with my first child, my eldest, she's almost 18. I didn't do this, but with my son, he has to send me an app request for me to say yes or no to particular apps. And I am, he's 13 next month. I am hoping that it doesn't become a fight in terms of TikTok and particularly Snapchat, talking about the school, so where the two blur, points 2 and 3, phones out of schools and social media until 16. The thing that's impacting children in relation to Snapchat as well, and why they'll keep pulling that phone out of school, is Snapchat streaks. It's incentivizing, it's gamifying, it's a mechanic that keeps you coming back. And it's how do you, even let's say that we don't get children off social media until by they're still on social media at 13, which is right now, I think, per platform the minimum age, right? Let's say they're getting on there. How do you work against such a gamified, coded way of keeping them coming back to a platform?
So I want to hit on one thing that you were talking about, which is the just complete lack of age gating. And, you're 13, you could be 5 and get onto these platforms. If you just have a phone and the basic understanding of how the world works, you just click a button and you're in.
Which they
And
do. Have you seen a 5-year-old using an iPad or using a phone?
they're very, yeah,
It's
they know what
terrifying.
they're doing. But so the way that we want to think about this is, look, the virtual world, it is different from the real world, but everything that you can do online, the online world is full of just so much stuff, good, bad, everything in the middle. And what we're kind of expected right now is, imagine that you're 10 years old and you go to a bar, and they don't ask for your ID. They're just says that this is your parents' problem to deal with, right? Parents have to deal with all of this. We can't, we can't deal with really verifying age and making sure it's right. This is what we're doing online, right? If you go to Pornhub or any thing, you click a button, anybody gets on there, and the expectation is parents need to get all these parental controls. You need to figure out every little thing that you need to do. And it's like, no, come on, there's already a standard, and that's age 13. Let's make that at least actually that kids who are 9, 10 are not getting on these platforms. There's a reason that age is set up that way. And we've really done very little to make that happen. And to your other point is, you're absolutely right that with snap streaks and the gamification of social media, making the online world is much more exciting and alluring often than sitting in math class or, being bored. And, that's exactly why we need to set some guardrails here, right? We don't let kids just go into a casino and start playing with slots and just okay, they'll figure it out,
On
right?
that
We
note,
need to
I
set
saw
those
the other day that
standards.
there was a slot where it would allow you to withdraw money from your bank account as you're on the slot. It was a video. Crazy, crazy, crazy. And if people 21 and over, going to fall foul of that, then imagine putting that in the hands of kids. You're right.
Exactly. Yeah. The adolescent brain, we don't have our prefrontal cortex set up and wired up, and that's impulse control, emotion regulation, all of that. That's the reason why we don't let kids have other much more engaging, addictive products.
What do you
Right?
say though to parents of those kids, and those kids don't recognize that they're not developed yet, and also would fight back against the notion that they're not developed, kind of, from a prefrontal cortex perspective? They'd say, that's a nonsense, that's scientific gibberish. I know my brain. I'm thinking in the right mind. Because that's, again, parent of a almost 18-year-old, 12, almost 13, and a 6-year-old. That's what you get back is, no, I know I'm thinking straight, I'm thinking clearly, and almost it feels like you're, like a sanctimony, like a condescendence for us to be like, nope, you're not developed yet.
Yeah.
How do you fight back? A lot of parents that listen to this, and I was speaking to one
Yeah.
yesterday and talking about the fact that I was going to be talking to you, because like, well, what do I say to my kid who's like, basically, shut up? How do you fight back against that? Or is it through fighting back, or is it just that collective kind of
Right.
collective movement?
I think there's a few points here that are important. The first is, right, you're absolutely right that we don't want to underestimate and like baby our kids, right? And so that's a big point of, right, we need to give kids more independence and freedom and responsibility in the real world where we evolved, where our brains expect certain kinds of experiences. Those are the places where we really want to let kids feel useful and give them that opportunity to really thrive. But when it comes to social media platforms, when it comes to these products, we know, and we've done this for generations, there are certain things that we have decided as adults that we understand that kids' brains aren't fully formed, and we just need to lay that law down. And it's going to be really hard when everybody else is not,
Mhm.
following that pattern. So it's very understandable that, your kid might say, well, 6 of my friends and their parents were okay with it.
Mm.
And that's really where that, again, that collective action
There's
uh,
almost a path of least
goes in.
resistance parenting kind of going on here, an abdication almost to parental responsibility, a throwing up of the arms of, well, it is what it is, and I guess we need to talk around that. I mean, so 3 was no phones in school, or during the school day, which is both, I think, commendable. I think teachers would fall over themselves with with appreciation were that to even be the case, and to be honest, I think a lot of children, teenagers, children, teenage, it's that adolescents might appreciate that fact too, because you're at school with your peers and your friends. You're already there, with them. I've not been, except for in what we call sixth form here, so 16, 17, 18-ish age. I've not been in a position where I've had a phone, but also my peers, my friends are right there. So I don't know quite why they use them, but I do know that my son, 13, as I say soon, says that lunchtime now is you've got all the kids who are sporty, go off and play sports, and then you've got the other kids who are just on their phones or their iPads or whatever, throughout the whole lunchtime. Might not even speak to another human during that time. So I can appreciate how my schools should do this. And that point 4 was, remind me, sorry, point 4 was.
More independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world.
Now, how do you gauge that? How do you put, right, let's say every parent says, cool, that's exactly what I want to do with my kid. How do you promote that? What are the steps to take to get to point 4?
Yeah, that's this is the most difficult, I think, of
Is it
the 4
quantifiably
reforms. It's a
difficult?
quantifiable and smartphone, social media, very clear. You can see exactly what you need to do, and it's about taking things away. Couple things that we often do is to have, think back to your earliest childhood memories and what were the best experiences that you had. I don't know. Do you want to? Maybe you just go first, and we could.
Like playing with friends, right? Let's go with that. There'll be an early memory of playing with friends, and maybe it's sport for me, or whatever. But there'll be some form of competition, or being silly with friends, I'd imagine.
Were your parents with you?
No.
Right. And this is kind of the main point that we see all the time is that typically the best experiences, the most memorable, the most thrilling and exciting, our parents weren't there,
That's
right?
a
Like,
great point. Yeah.
right. Parents and thrill, not, they don't go well together. And why this matters, right, is that we need to develop competency and self-governance as we grow up, right? And we have all of these experiences doing that, playing with other kids. Yeah, so let me just walk through a little bit. So my grandfather, for example, he grew up in the US in New York City, and that was in the 50s. And now, in the city, like today, you don't see any kids alone by themselves. But what they did back then is they would play stickball every single day after school until after school till it started to get dark. No parents around, and the kids created and structured the games themselves. And what's so important about that is that what you have there is that kids are learning to negotiate conflict. You're learning to um, deal with, being an outcast or not an outcast, and learning to navigate these social situations in order to thrive. And what's important is that this is what all mammals do. All mammals play. And we need to play a lot in order to wire up our brains. So think about like baby kittens, right? Have you ever they just play constantly. And that's what children need to do. And the key principle is that kids are anti-fragile. And what that means is that there are some things like this isn't a good here, like a glass, right? If I drop this on the floor, I don't want to do that because if I stress that system, it falls apart and it breaks. Then there are things like my water bottle here, very robust. If I drop it, it doesn't break. But then there are things like the muscles in my body that if I strain it, it actually gets stronger. I need to break those down in order to build back up. My immune system is the same way. If you block any bacteria, right, you become more likely to get an autoimmune disorder. So what I'm saying is that human children and human brains are anti-fragile. We need challenges and stressors in order for us to grow and become competent adults. And the kind of challenges that we need exist in the real world, where kids are negotiating conflict and um, creating things together, often without parental supervision.
What I loved about this part of what you and Jonathan have got into with the book is you talk about there being a high bar to entry for in-person relationships and social media being a low bar to entry and the impacts of that, and to speak about people. If there's a high bar to entry for a community, then you seek to protect and repair relationships, and you protect your friendships, you protect your relationships, in with parents, with peers, with teachers, those things. And where they go wrong, and they can and will, you aim to repair those relationships because you understand the importance of that community to you. Now, what we're possibly finding is it's a lower bar to entry in terms of a social media relationship with an influencer or some or that person over there. I guess you can speak to this way better than I can, but also I'd love you to touch on this, but also that asynchronicity, that synchronous and asynchronous aspect to both real life and social media based
Mm.
relationships. You okay speaking to that?
Yeah. And I think maybe just to tie what I was just saying into this is, so what I'm saying is that human beings are anti-fragile and we need to have all these kinds of experiences and challenges in order to become competent adults. And one of the questions and pushbacks we often get is, well, can't the virtual world do that? Like, aren't you being hypocritical there? And what you're talking about is just how different the virtual world is from the real world, and how we really weren't evolved to deal with the kind of problems that are faced online. And so you spoke to just a couple of them. So the first is that um, the virtual world is disembodied. It's completely non-physical. In the real world, we're embodied, we're physical, we're moving around. Conversations are in the real world synchronous. And in some cases, virtual conversations like this, right, going back and forth, it's a good thing. But on social media, especially things like Instagram or Snapchat, it's asynchronous. You're posting, you're waiting for people to comment, waiting to be judged, and it's not happening in real time. Um, we also like you said, high bar for entry and exit into relationships and communities. And so, at any moment, relationships become really unstable. They're very quick. They're somewhat more shallow. Um, you can leave them at really any point in time. And so, where does the anti-fragility come in here? Is so just imagine that you are um, the social comparison is a great example. So in the real world, we have our friend group, and back in the day, you have your group, your classroom, and you compare yourself against the other girls, for example, in your class. And sometimes you might feel kind of bad about yourself because I don't look as good as this other person. I'm not as smart, but the sample size is pretty small, and you learn to navigate those challenges as you grow up, especially if you have a strong community and support. Okay, but now let's take that and shift it onto Instagram. And what happens? Well, now you're comparing yourself against the entire world, and you are constantly seeing 24/7 people who look better than you, smarter than you, whatever it is.
They're
And
funnier, they're richer, they're more successful,
yep,
younger, they're
and
you know,
it's
more
also
popular.
metricked, right? And it's also you see it with the likes and the retweets and the comments, and constantly over and over and over. That is a very different kind of strain than the social comparison in the real world. And we're not kids, especially going through puberty, right? We're not set up to deal with, that kind of social comparison. And it's the same with cyberbullying. Bullying in the real world, it can be a real problem, but some exclusion, it's important for us to experience that.
I
But what
think
happens?
you touched on the bodied and disembodied aspect of bullying, of real life online. I guess the disembodied aspect of bullying in the social media age or with smartphones is it follows you home. It
It
doesn't leave
follows you
you.
home. Yeah, it
Mm.
goes to the bathroom, it goes to your bedroom. It's constant, it's often anonymous where you don't even know who's
You
saying
know what
what
I've
about you.
seen even, and this is another relationship I've got with family member, looking at a WhatsApp group that they were part of and seeing some unkind things being said. And then you see it's that Lord of the Flies esque. You've got the leaders and the followers, and you've got the people that stay quiet, but also the ones that pipe up because they think they should, because there's a degree of again, potential social isolation if they don't say something negative, unkind, whatever. So it's not an option for them to shut up. It's not an option for them not to say anything. Some of these children, they think, oh well, if I and you can. I'm reading between the lines here, but you almost see a direct unkindness because of the expectations on them. Because why you can imagine them at school the next day. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you follow my lead in being unkind to that person? We're just messing around. It's just funny.
Mhm.
And then, oh, you're boring, let's exclude you. And there's a fear of that. There's a fear of exclusion where, as you said, this didn't, when I was at school, bullying, and particularly being a boy, and I'd love to get onto, teenage girls in particular and some data around this, but, being a boy, especially I went to a boys' school, um, if there's an issue, you fight. You have a little scrap and then it's done. Or, it's, and not, I can't say that for everybody because I know that, there's, bullying issues and things like that. But, when I was certainly at school, it didn't follow you home. It might be there the next morning when you get to school and you deal with it in whatever way you have to, but it's a bodied rather than disembodied way of
Yes.
dealing with exactly this.
That's Rich, that's exactly, you captured the point super well, which is just that all of these things that happen online are normal human things that we do anyways. It's just leveled up, multiply it by 1,000. And then instead of just like having a 10-pound barbell or something like manageable on you, it's like we just put like 3,000 pounds on your back and we're like, why can't you handle it?
Mm.
It's like, well, you know,
And also
these
you're 14 and you're going through puberty and all these other changes. And let's throw this 3,000 pounds on you. And
right, exactly.
yeah.
And it's not that these things don't happen in the real world, gossip, shaming, it happens. The problem is the scale and the way that it's being incentivized. And, we are driven by incentives.
A line I love to parrot endlessly, and anybody listens to this will know that I've said this many times, is that, comparison is the thief of joy. and that's the thing. And especially when you're 13, 14, 15, and you are looking at these people, and you have full access to billions of people, and you then do compare yourselves to them. Whereas to your point a second ago, you do that in your tribe, in your smaller community, in your, in your peer group. Now, I know for a fact that I could, I'm quite active on social media for my PR agency. Professionally, I've been doing that 16 years. I know social media is beneficial to me on the whole. Does that stop it when I've had a particularly bad day or a hard day as an agency owner, and I go and I see, oh, that agency owner is doing brilliantly. Look at how well they're doing. Look at their following. Look at their, all of those things. Look at, the great things that clients are saying about them. And that's as an adult, and that's the thing is, I'm so grateful. I say now, and I've said many times, I'm so grateful that I am not growing up in an age where I have to worry. I not only have the day-to-day concerns and tribulations, but I also then have the impact of that following me around constantly. And oh, that person is funnier, better looking, happier, look at all the likes they get, all of those things that impacts us as adults. And I think it'd be childish for us to pretend that it didn't.
Let me just put a couple stats down just to
Yeah,
give a
please,
scale
let's
of
get into,
what we're talking about.
let's absolutely get into stats. I think it's massively important. Both, I know that there are discrepancies, boys and girls in particular, around this, but I think a lot of people would be surprised at this scale. They think, oh, it's just my daughter. They think, oh, it's just my son. They think it's just, especially in terms of ill mental health and conditions and things like that. So please do.
Yeah. So first, I just want to talk about, just a sense of the amount of time just by itself that is being spent on these platforms. I think is very illuminating to the issue. So in the US, we have this Gallup survey that was done recently, and they found the average teen is spending just about 5 hours a day on social media alone, right? That's the average teen. That's an enormous amount of time. In terms of screen use more broadly, for entertainment, general purposes, average of 7 to 9 hours a day, right?
Does that include social media?
That includes social media.
That includes social media, right? Okay.
Right. So that's an enormous amount of time, and
that's a
this
school
goes
day.
into, yeah, it's an entire school day, and what that speaks to is just another level of where other harms come in, is that it's displacing so much, and we see that kids are not sleeping as much, they're not spending as much time with other kids, and their attention is being fragmented and pulled in 1,000 directions. So, and one other just stat is from Pew, that just about half of teens say that they're online almost constantly, which means that every waking moment of their life, they're thinking about these devices, these platforms. And so just to get a sense of, if we want to know like what kids are doing and thinking about, it's this is where they are, right?
Do you mean that in the sense of, let's say I'm talking to a friend, I'm always very, very aware of what that rectangle in my pocket is doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. It's the, and I guess we're probably to an extent guilty of that too.
Oh, yeah.
I'm very, very aware when I sit down, if my phone isn't in my pocket, or I was going to say a bag, rarely, in my pocket, it's face down, and I think it's an act of respect to the person you're with to ensure that, you're not doing that constantly. Your eyes not flicking left and right to see your phone, so that when it lights up, because I think there's almost a discredit to the person you're with. My attention should be divided, because maybe there's something more interesting that's happened just down there on the table than with you. So, I personally, I'm keen to do that, but I've seen children in similar situations where attention is very obviously divided. And, to your point, you think that it's every waking moment there's what's happening, what's happening where I'm not.
Yeah. I mean, right. I'll very
I appreciate we're being over the top, but yeah.
Yeah. But there's a general sense, and this is what kids are saying, is that they are online almost all the time. So this is what they're saying, is that there is a sense of, I am constantly being plugged in. And we know that humans are not good multitaskers. And so we're constantly being pulled one thing to the other. And that is really detrimental to learning, to trying to think, to just really everything. And so, and just another example of this is the average teen gets 237 notifications on their phone every day. And just about 20% get about 500. And so that's one every 2 minutes. And so, even if you're trying to not pay attention, it's like, this is, this is right. We're developing just this, the devices are meant to keep pulling us back and pulling us back and pulling us back. And that's really where these products are being moved from being a tool that we use to a tool that uses us, right? And that's what we're trying to change. It's just, what is our relationship to these devices? And let's at least give kids the opportunity to develop their, uh, their attention, their emotional stability and regulation, and then let them decide how they want to use these tools. But we're not giving them a real chance by saying, here, take it and figure out what to do. And in many ways, I think about it like my ayahuasca experience, years ago, which was like, here's this shaman, he gives me this thing, and he's like, figure it out. You'll be all
Mhm.
right. Right. This is essentially what we've done to kids.
The book starts with the Mars comparison. Would you
Right.
send your kid to Mars? Right. And I think, your point about, if there was a toy, would you buy it if it was almost certain to, do this in this percentage of the population? It is, would you give this drug to your ayahuasca experience? Would you give this drug to your kid knowing that there's a good chance that this is what happens? So let's speak specifically to teens, in particular girls then. So what are the impacts that we're seeing, or let's talk to mental health trends and facts, figures around that, and then I guess break those down. So feel free to share screen as well if you'd like to, and
Yeah. Yeah.
because I
Let me
think I
share.
should say there's a fantastic supplement with the book on the anxiousgeneration.com. There's all the resources. There's the PDF that you can kind of the graphs that you can look at as you listen along or read along.
Okay, so I'll just walk through a couple of the trends that we see. So a lot of this is US based, but we
Mhm.
see similar things in other countries. Um, this is major depressive trends among American adolescents, so 12 to 17 years old, from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. And they ask a series of questions where you ultimately can get a sense of major depressive episodes in the last year. And so what we have is, before 2010, girls are higher than boys, and that's
Mhm.
pretty much always been the case. But rates are relatively flat. And
So
then,
just for anybody listening, we're looking for girls rates between 2004 and 2010 of between 10 and 15% of girls have had a major depression among teens, and boys it's roughly it stays around 5%. Can you just clarify what major depression among teens means as a term?
yeah, so in this case, it's a sense of profound sense of isolation and loneliness, and I how they define it exactly in this survey, I don't have off the top of my head, but it's over a series of at least 2 weeks,
And this is a
where they're
self-selected, self-answered, so it's a question, how do you feel about X? And then these are responses
yeah,
to.
there's a
Got it.
series of 13 different questions that they need
Right.
to answer, and if you reach a certain
Okay.
threshold, then you get considered to be
Got it.
having a major depressive episode.
Understood.
Um,
Thank you.
so right, so this is what we're looking at is before 2010. After 2010 is more than a doubling for both boys and girls. And by 2021, it's just about 1 in 3 teen girls are now reporting that they've had a major depressive episode
That's
in the
one in
last year.
three. So
Just
this
about
is
1 in 3.
13 to 18-year-old girls. So again, for anybody listening, that's in 2010 where it was about 12%. Then 2015 it jumps up to about 20, and 2020, 2021 we're looking just below 30% of girls. So that's a 145% increase since 2010.
Yeah. And for boys,
Wow.
even though, the girls' rates really shoot up here, and it's very noticeable, but boys are also, the relative increase has been 161% increase since 2010. So we went
Mm,
from just about 5% to 10%, which is
mm.
quite substantial of a change. And sometimes the boys can be missed from this story. Um,
So
so let
just
me,
again to clarify, we're saying that around 30% of girls around 2021 had a major depression or major depressive episode, and around 11 to 12 it looks like percent of boys.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Okay. And let me show. So here, this is another figure that helps us understand like what has been changing over the last decade. And this is among American undergraduate students. This is a little bit older. And this is a self-report of what have they been diagnosed with by a
Mm.
doctor. And what we see is right before 2010, just about 10% of undergraduates were diagnosed with an anxiety or depressive disorder. And that's always been much higher than other issues like ADHD, anorexia, substance use. But what really changed was what we call internalizing disorders, so
Mm.
anxiety and depression. So then by 2019, now you have just about 25% of undergrads who have been diagnosed with anxiety disorder, about 20% with depression. Um, and so just
And these are
very, very,
diagnoses. So this is a GP, a doctor has said you know you have diagnosable anxiety, you have diagnosable depression. That's 25% anxiety, 20% depression.
yep.
Okay. Wow.
And when we look in the US, it's concentrated by age. So this is looking at kids who feel nervous all of the time or most of
Yeah.
the time in the past month. And so, I mean, it's very clear by this graph, but what we can see is that before 2010, the rates were actually generally quite similar
Mhm.
between all age groups, right? The youngest were always
Between
a little more anxious.
So between 18 and 50 plus, we're looking, the differences are kind of, what's that, 4% to 7%,
Yeah.
roughly. Yeah, got it.
Right. And then by 2022, that gap is just enormous, where now it's about 20% of 18 to 25-year-olds are saying that they have that they're nervous all of the time or most of the time in the past month, while rates for those above the age of 50 hasn't changed almost
Mhm.
at all. Right.
Right.
So whatever changed, and what we believe it's this radical
But
transformation in
but
childhood. Yeah.
it needs to be said also that there is a marked increase, 111% increase
Yeah.
in ages 26 to 34 since 2010. So that's from roughly 5% to 12, 13%, and ages 35 to 49, even there's almost a 50% increase since 2010.
Yeah.
So this isn't impacting people over the age of 50. And um, I have a feeling I know what changed at and around 2010, 2012. Please continue. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And we see very similar trends in many countries around the world. So this is from a community health survey, national survey in Canada, which asks about if you have the quality of your mental health, and if it's very good or excellent. And before 2010, this is just among Canadian women.
Mhm.
Before 2010, the youngest group, which in this case was those 15 to 30 years old, were the highest. They reported the best mental health. By 2015, they are now reporting the lowest rates of excellent or very good mental health compared to other age groups. And so, again, we see the same pattern. That is the youngest women in particular who have really been hit hard by what happened.
Can we
And
just go
then,
back to that again? Sorry, just to go back to that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then to say that by 2019, 15 to 30, I mean, what percentage is that? So it's gone from about 76% said that they had excellent or very good mental health to just over half now say
yeah,
that they have excellent or very good mental health. And it's a marked decrease. That's incredible.
yeah. So I'm going to just fast forward through my slides
Please.
real quick to something I think is quite important. So one of the critiques that we often get is that everything I just showed you was about self-reporting. And, maybe this is just changing norms, changing ways that kids are more open to talking about mental health issues. But
Mhm.
what is essential to know is it's not just self-report. We're seeing behavioral changes. So things
Mm.
like going to the emergency room because of non-fatal self-harm, self-poisoning, cutting, that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Um, and here's in the US, we have the same pattern. This is among 10 to 14-year-olds, the preteens. Over a tripling since 2010 for preteen girls in going to the emergency room for non-fatal self-harm, and actually a 100% increase for boys as well. But just like with anxiety and depression, rates are much, much lower for boys. This is really something that girls
So
experience a lot.
again, to put this in perspective, this is a rate per 100,000 of the population. In 2010, we're talking, what's that, 180 girls per 100,000. And in 2022, we're saying almost 600. So 600 girls per 100,000 went to the US emergency department for non-fatal self-harm, and they're aged 10 to 14. So it's no surprise then that, you know, if you speak to a parent here in the UK, even, you will know somebody, and you'll know somebody whose daughter, you know, niece, you know, cousin, whatever, you know, has been kind of down this path. So 281% increase in girls self-harming or visiting the emergency department for self-harm since 2010.
Yeah, it's really sad. And so just to extending off
Whoa.
of right. Extending off of what I just showed you. So this is
Yeah.
the same age group, but there is something, you know, in the US, you go to the emergency room and then they have to decide, are you going to be hospitalized? Are you going to be transferred from the emergency room? So this is the more extreme, heavy cases. And what's really, you know, this is really striking. It's an over a 500% increase. They don't have data for every single year, which is why I did this 2007-8 comparison rather than 2010. So since 2007 and 8, so those were averaged together, there's been an over a 500% increase in actual hospitalizations for preteen girls. So this is not just changes in self-report, this is changes in actual behavior. And it's really quite striking. And what's really striking is we see really similar trends around the world with this same stuff. So this is in the UK, self-harm episodes jumping, right? Ages 13 to 16, but we see the same thing for younger preteens and also the 17, 18-year-olds, where right around 2010, we get this big jump.
Okay. Now we should say and clarify what we're skirting around here, which is to say that the iPhone as a smartphone came out in 2000, you know, I think it was 2008, right? And so Instagram was bought by Facebook. I want to say 2010. I might be
2012.
2012, right? But social media, you know, access to smartphones, or, you know, ownership of smartphones and access to social media was the, you know, if we're looking correlation, causation, you know, what changed in society around that time. And, you know, and we can get on to, I do want to talk about, you know, the people that say that it's not technology, but the times we live in. That's something I do want to talk about after this, because it's a fair rebuttal. I think it's an odd rebuttal when the evidence looks quite so stark and clear. But we're saying here, 2010, 2012, there's an enormous uptick, a hockey stick uptick of girls, particularly preteen and teen girls, self-harming.
Yeah. And just to show really quick, we see the same thing in Canada.
So that's US, Britain, and Canada you just shown. Exactly
and
that.
I don't have it here, but I have graphs for Australia, New Zealand.
Wow, okay.
All 5 countries, same time, same way, same group of people. And it's quite striking. And in the US in particular, suicide is another way that we can look at what's been going on with people. And when we look at girls, and again, it's very important that like the social media effect is really impacting girls the most. Really large rises for both the preteens and the teens, and rates for boys have also been rising quite a lot. But I do want to note that the trends for boy suicide does vary country to country more than what I found for girls, which is consistent across all the English-speaking countries. In fact, so Gen Z girls, those born after 1995, have higher rates of suicide than any other previous generation of girls that I have data for, that I've been able to find. So what happened in the early 2010s really impacted the way that young girls feel about themselves and interact. And what we really think is it's not just social media, it is the movement of social life. It is the movement from the play-based childhood to the phone-based childhood.
I think that's a really important thing to distinguish. And again, just for anybody listening, it's 167% increase in US suicide rates for girls aged 10 to 14.
Yeah,
So
important to note that the rates are very low generally for the youngest group, but it's the fact that it changed so rapidly and so much in such a short period of time. And you can see that since the 1980s, it's been steady. Like
Mm.
there has been almost very little change in the rates for young girls. So something really changed. Um, yeah, and then I just wanted to show one other thing
Mhm.
going back is this is a global test that's done every 3 years called PISA, and they look at performance among 15-year-olds in math and reading and science. And um, what we can see just in the graph that I'm showing is average scores across all three domains. And what we find is that from 2000 to 2010, scores were generally stable. You know, there's some fluctuation, and then all of a sudden, scores start to plummet, and it's continued to this day. It started before the COVID pandemic.
Mhm.
And so the point of this graph is, one, it's showing that something really changed in terms of learning outcomes and performance this is across 36 different countries. And it happened at the same time as we're seeing also this mental health collapse. And so what we're seeing, it's not just mental health, it's also academics, it's many parts of life really
And
seem
that cannot be, and let's just let me play devil's advocate for a second. That cannot be a global difference in the way that academic attainment is scored, or
no,
academic.
this test did not change in this period. It's the same test.
Right.
And yeah,
So I mean, to put it unkindly, you could argue that generations are becoming less clever, or are,
uh,
aren't as academically capable as previous generations.
it's
Let's.
one way to put
I'm
it.
trying not to put a too fine a point on it, and
Right.
again, I'll be
Yeah, I
careful in
think
around the edit.
the broader point here is that something happened in the
Mhm.
lives of young people right around 2010 to 2015 that severely impacted their mental health and
Mhm.
their capacity to think. And I don't think that any of this is their fault, but I think we need to look at what changed in their lives and what points
Again,
to this. Yeah.
this being, I told you before we started recording, this being the starting line, the whole thing is we all start from somewhere and we didn't do anything to deserve where we started, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
coming at this with kindness um, is important, because it's understanding, okay, well, this is just society. They're not, they don't want to be necessarily, more mentally unwell. They don't want to necessarily be, less academically successful. It's just where we find ourselves. And I think I love that you said something happened. You said at each slide, something happened at that point. And I think as parents, as society, we need to say something happened. What happened? Let's look at it, and let's not let this keep happening. So thank you for running me through the slides. That's, for anybody watching this, and I do think if you're interested, go watch this on YouTube, because the slides that Zach's just taken us through are, eye opening, and we've tried to, bring you along,
Yeah, yeah.
audibly, but go and have a look. Wow. Okay. So, um, where do you go from there? Where do you go from there, Zach? So, um, let's talk about therapy.
Mm.
You touched on at the top that you then went through a period of therapy. So, there is, let's say that there is this, pandemic of ill mental health, and what we've been trying to do is look for answers to that, to those issues in the last 10 years. I don't think anybody's gone without recognizing issues in ill mental health, or recognizing, oh wait, there's a higher increase, higher incidence of self-harm or suicidal ideation or unhappiness or general malaise, or I don't think we can pretend, both in teens and adults, that that hasn't happened. But what's happened is there's become a normalization of therapy, as opposed, so it's almost, are we dealing with the symptoms rather than the root cause? Because I do think, my personal stance on it is therapy is wonderful,
Mhm.
eternal, every week, without, and without kind of loss, or without then taking a step back from it. Sometimes I don't think therapy every week forever and ever is the answer. Like, personally, I'm not going to try and put words into your mouth, but how do you think therapy has changed, or in relation to this data? Like, how have we so far as a society tried to impact, or tried to deal with this issue?
Yeah, I liked what you said, dealing with the symptom, not dealing with the
The root
underlying.
cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, it's like if you have I don't know, you got like stabbed with something in your arm and then you're not taking it out, but you keep like going to the doctor. You're like, can I have some cream or something to put
Right.
on it? Like it really hurts. Like, what am I going to do? It's like, we got to take out the thing in your
Yeah.
arm.
Right. Deal with the wound
And
itself and then the implications of the wound rather than just dealing with the, hey, let's just put a plaster around it.
right, exactly. And I think that when it comes to, so first, just to make it clear, there's so many factors that go into the mental health of young people and why some kids are more vulnerable than other kids to different kinds of things. And so I think that it's going to, for any individual family, it's a case by case thing. But what we're saying is like, look, the evidence seems to be pointing to this rapid transformation of childhood, which has largely been driven by smartphones and social media. Let's do an experiment. Let's take this out of kids' lives and see if that makes a big difference, right? We can do all the therapy we want. We can do all of that, but you know, let's try some. It's cheap. This is easy.
Mm.
It's something testable. Take it out of the lives, and then we can see, does this change?
So you don't think it's too late? You think that, this isn't a case of Pandora's box is open, it is what it is. You think that there is, with these 4 ways, there is something fixable?
Look, if a train leaves a station and we know that it's about to fall off of a cliff, we're going to do everything we can to get that train to stop and turn it around.
Yeah.
It might be hard, but look, we can do this. And it's very cheap. And if we can just coordinate together, that's really the big challenge. But I
Mm.
think it's very doable. We delay till 14 smartphones, delay social media till 16. We get the schools on board. Schools can easily implement these policies. And we do think that, within a couple of years, if we do this, we'll really see um, some substantial changes. And if we do not see those changes, well, now we know that we need to look somewhere else. But the evidence is pointing right now to a big reason for this recent rise is this change in childhood, and we can do a lot about it.
Now, I think that we talk a lot about, talking about mental health is a good thing. It's good to talk. It's important to talk. It's all of these things. I am concerned on a personal level that given that this is all about resilience and meeting a challenge and overcoming and all of those things. And I'd argue that I've done that in my life, and that I know many of the people that I speak to on this are incredible people that have overcome odds. I'm not just trying to find the person with the worst life on this. I promise I'm not. Point to them and God, look, aren't they unhappy? The main thing for me here is to talk about the fact that we will meet challenges in life and we have to overcome them. There's not a person alive that hasn't had a challenge they've had to overcome. But it's yes, we can talk about mental health, but at what point are we talking ill mental health into existence? And at what point are we perpetuating ill mental health by continuing to talk about it and focusing on the wound, like, looking at it rather than doing something about it? And I think what struck me, and the reason I was desperate to talk to you, was you have the most actionable plan I've seen to do something about something, to do something about a problem we all know is there. You said yourself, those students said that they know it's there. Adults, parents, we know it's an issue, but we don't know what to do about it. And you feel like a terrible parent. You feel like a failure. I felt personally like I failed my eldest in particular around this. And I'm sure that a therapist has told her in various other ways, manners, that I'm, it's the way you've been brought up. It's these abuses and these this trauma. That's a word that gets thrown around like it's nothing now. Trauma and abuse. It's like, you've really got to take a step back and say, okay, are we talking these ill mental health conditions up and ignoring the root cause? I think that's the main thing. And again, before coming onto this, I was very careful that I was very aware that I don't want to put that on you, but the rate of people identifying, self-identifying, and then almost circling the drain of ill mental health in the name of anxiety, ADD. The people that are like, no, I'm definitely autistic. I don't know if you've got any statistics around this, but the number of people that see that that's the answer, rather than possibly go to the much easier root problem, which is we are living online lives in a way that is disembodied, that is asynchronous, in a way that is lacking in building personal relationships and understanding the importance of those personal relationships. I guess
So let me, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I think I've
No,
got a lot of thoughts
you
around
said
this,
a
and
lot
it's
there.
yes,
And I think
apologies.
instead of going to the data first, I'll do an anecdote about my own life, about why, what I believe is why I changed. And so when I had my, mental health breakdown, um, I thought that my life was over, right? And I believed very firmly that, I was broken, and and I was given different diagnoses, I was given medication and all of that. And I went to therapy, all of that did help me. But what really changed me was that I got a job, and I got a job working in wilderness therapy. And what that was is I was now in charge of 12 kids out in the middle of the woods for 3 weeks. And I was given an enormous amount of responsibility. And I had people who trusted me, who said, Zach, you are way more than you're capable of. And that's what part 4 of our solution is that we give kids the faith that, hey, you are way more capable than you think you are. You are not. And what I learned is, yeah, I'm still anxious, still had panic attacks on those trips, but guess what? I did it, and I was able to do it. And I did this year after year after year, and eventually I grew in awareness that I'm more than my mental illness. And I think that this is the problem, right? Is that we need to give kids the opportunities, um, with the right, you need to have guidance, you need to have support, you need to have mentors. But we need to give kids like a real chance at thriving and responsibility, and for them to learn just, what they're capable of, their identity, all of this. And I don't think social media gives any of like gives that to kids. And what we can do, I really think, is that, yes, social media has led to, and, sometimes excessive therapy is that we focus too much on, we're too weak, we can't do things, we label ourselves, and all of that is true. But what we need to do, we need to give an alternative. We need to help kids see that they're more than that. And um, so I don't know. That's just my own
No,
my
I
own
really appreciate that.
experience.
Cheers, Zach. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really helpful to hear that. And effectively, what I'm hearing there is that you found some self worth in something both real and actual, and in the real world, and also in within yourself. You found that you were capable of more than you thought you were, and that you weren't just a diagnosis or a you weren't just a mental illness.
And it
Uh,
was adults putting faith in my abilities, even when I couldn't see it myself. And this is so John Haidt, he started a nonprofit called Let Grow. And so people can go to letgrow.org. And this is all about those actionable steps of how do we give kids back that independence and responsibility that helps you develop that strong sense of inner competency and worth. And so as an example, one thing they do is called the Let Grow experience. And what they have is they say, it's a homework assignment. They say, have your kid go home, and they're going to do something they've never done before without their parents' help. It's a very simple thing. And kids do remarkable things. They'll simple things, cooking dinner for the family, or going out to the store to pick up something on their own. And what we find again and again is just these simple acts change the way that not only the kids feel about themselves, but also the parents are like, wow, they could actually do this. And, what we've been finding over and over again is that we've been underestimating kids a
I
lot, and
completely
especially
agree.
in the real world.
I think there's I mean, it was, I think it was the coddling of the American mind, wasn't it? That was an early or precursive kind of. If you were to look back at the timeline of how you get to the anxious generation as a book, I think that's in there as a flag point. It was a piece. Was it in the New York Times? You'll know more than I do.
Yeah, it was in the Atlantic,
The Atlantic. My
and
apologies.
then it was turned into a book.
Yeah, and I think that we coddle or, as I say, abdicate parental responsibility sometimes to and defer to authorities or schools or teachers. I mean, I've got plenty of teacher friends that say, "Rich, I'm as much of a therapist or a counselor now And I didn't get into teaching to be a therapist or a counselor, but I feel like I'm as much of a therapist or a teacher, a counselor now as I am a teacher. And and almost I think sometimes parents, you feel like you don't know the right thing to do, so you defer to, well, this is white coat syndrome. It's like, well, that person must know what they're doing, 'cause they're in a position of authority in that place. That doctor must know what they're doing. That therapist must know what they're doing. I believe personally, we know our kids better than anybody else possibly can. And as parents, we need to provide that structure, that safe place for them, and not just, throw them to I was going to say to the wolves. That's really unkind, but to the, to these people that have possibly professional interest in retaining that child or that person's, constant coming back. But also, I think we have our children's best interests at heart, and that's something that I think we've kind of lost. I think people have become a tiny bit afraid as parents to set boundaries, which we all know children need, thrive within. I think people are just saying, well, I don't know what to do. And again, just to bring it back to that point, that's why I appreciate what you're doing with this book. Is you're saying, okay, you're saying you don't know what to do. Here's some steps. Here's some guidelines. Here's some guidance. Your child will not love this. You're like, you might not like this. Imagine, some parents out there that listen to this might say, well, my partner couldn't cope without social media. I know that for a fact. They couldn't deal with this. I mean, I think, I wanted to come back to the point where people say, well, let's talk about 2010. Let's talk about climate change. Let's talk about those things. Forget technology. Is it not just that we're living in harder times uncertain times? Could it not be that we point to? When you say something changed, did that change? Or so can you speak to that? Because I think a lot of people listening to this will be like, no, I love Instagram, I love TikTok. I'm not getting off of that. So what would you say to those?
Yeah. So let me just say one thing first, and then I'll answer the alternative explanation question. No, all good. So yeah, I just want to kind of just lay it out one more time what the thesis of the book is. That we've been kind of hitting on both of them, and I just it's both. We've been overprotecting kids in the real world and underprotecting them online. And it's about striking that right balance. That's what the book's about. And we propose 4 big reforms, right? No smartphones till high school, 14. No social media till 16. Getting phones out of school, and trying to bring back that independence, responsibility, free play in the real world. Best way to get resources for that, letgrow.org. So, that's the big picture. So, okay, can it be? There's a ton of explanations of what else could have happened. Okay, the biggest one we do here is the global financial crisis of 2008. That can explain the international pattern. Financial crisis really disrupt family life, which creates all sorts of problems. But what we find when we look at the data is 2 things. The first is, why does it seem to impact preteen girls more than anyone else? That already makes
all those preteen kids that cared loads about the recession.
Right. The second thing is, when we look at the figures of teen depression, and we map that onto unemployment rates. So, right, unemployment starts to go up after the financial crisis, and then it drops down right around 2000. I think it's 2011 or 2012 when it starts to dip, and then it continues to fall and fall. And so if it was caused by a financial crisis, we would expect that as as that started to fade and the economy got better, that we would see a change in depression. That's not what we see at all, right? Teen depression just continued to surge upwards. It just doesn't fit the data there. Now, the point about we live in a scarier world, I mean, I want to just point people back to World War II, the Cold War, threats of nuclear war, right? The world has always been a very scary place. There's a lot of uncertainty. What has changed is that now 9-year-olds are being pumped with the worst stories, the worst kinds of stories, curated into these little bite-sized pieces all day of global warming, terrorism, whatever it is. So yeah, I think the perception that the world is awful and horrifying is a very real thing. but it's not that the world has gotten that much more dangerous. It's that our perceptions have changed, and I think that has impacted adults enormously.
I can
And it's
speak to this
also
forever. Like, obviously, being I work in public relations, so I've seen the change in the media. I started in 2008, so I came in that credit crunch, recession, whatever you want to call it, that global issue. And I've seen the media change enormously in that time, and I've only seen the way that we as adults initially, respond to that as worsening. The world does seem like a less kind, caring, successful place. Whereas there was a book called, I want to say it's called Full Fact, I forget, that looked at every markable metric of childhood, poverty globally, and all of these things. And the fuller picture is that it's basically, if it bleeds, it leads, and that's the news we see, and that's the news that shares well, and that's the news that in a stricken, restricted media environment where that fewer journalists than ever, higher targets than ever, they just can't monetize in the way they once did. Effectively, Google and Meta are eating,
and again,
news
just
outlets
to
dinner.
add on to that, it's I'm just thinking about it now. It's the same issue that I was talking about with the 300-pound barbell. It's like, again, we do that, or that's what these devices are doing to kids. It's like, here, it's normal to see, in the real world, like, the bad things sometimes happen, and you have to confront it. But when you're being pumped 24/7 with the worst news stories, the worst things, you have no context. It's like, again, putting that barbell that's way too heavy, and you're just crushed by it.
Yes, you said, when you talk about the 80s and 90s and the coddling of children, and or the overemphasis on personal safety in the real world. And what happened? The media were talking a lot more about rapes and murders and kidnappings and things like that of children. So of course there's an outsized response to that, which is our kids can't go out and play. And then, where that corresponds to, or kind of, there's a cross section, or there's a meeting point there of when technology is like, okay, cool, I'll stay at home, I won't go out, and this is fun anyway. So I guess that's what's happened here. I mean, how do you feel about the whole kind of ADHD TikTok, and issues with that self-identification with that kind of social media, where somebody says, "Oh no, I'm definitely ADHD." And we've seen, I'm sure I don't have stats to hand, but the increase in people self-identifying and then going after a diagnosis of kind of mental conditions. I don't know if you describe that as a mental condition or an internalized condition. You called it. Do you think that there's a contagion aspect to that there is oh, I see myself in that, therefore I must be that?
Yeah, so there are multiple things going on there. The first is, what I think is true is, it has become easier for kids to feel like they can talk about whatever it is that they're going through, and I think that that's generally a good thing.
We would all say it's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, we would all say it's a good thing, and I want that to be really clear, that, this rising acceptance is good. What I think that the second point is just that what gets attention on social media, the way that it's incentivized, is for more extreme behavior, for more outrage, for all of this. And that's how you build prestige. And that's what you see as being successful. And so, what I'm trying to say is that we have an incentive system built on social media that is trying to incentivize more extreme behavior and ideas. And that's not good for any kind of identity formation. Right. And so I think that there is an aspect of, like, some element of social contagion, but you don't know, one kid to the next. And this is a complicated issue. But my broader point is that the incentives on these platforms are not healthy for developing identity, in many kinds of ways, because the incentives are for not to have a nuanced understanding and developing like a healthy sense of self. It's pushing more outrage, more extreme content, and that's That's what really needs to change. It's
It's a
not the
further
kids.
polarization.
Yeah,
That's
and
my
it's not the kids. That's not the problem. The problem are the platforms and the way that these are designed.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I would go to, let's go to like the fat acceptance community movement as evidence of something that on the face of it seems like a good thing. That we're more kind to people, that we're more understanding. But by normalizing and almost incentivizing, the you see people like I'm trying to be again. I'm trying to be kind around this. You see your Lizzos of the world that make it clear that, oh no, this is big is beautiful. This is the right thing to be. And I'm just picking fat acceptance. I was a personal trainer before I got into PR. I love fitness and health, and I think that we all should aspire to a healthier life. Whether in any way, whether you're 300 pounds or what, just I think a healthy lifestyle and recognizing the benefit of that is massive. But just talking about that, nobody would say I'm part of the smoking community, and recognizing the ills of that and the health implications of that. So I guess I'm aware we possibly don't have the time to dive into that, but for me, it's just it's an interesting conversation to have with somebody that's looked at this from a statistical perspective and said people are unhappier than ever, and statistically we can point to, let's talk about the people that matter here that we're talking about, which is teens, which is preteen and teen, and they're unhappier than ever, and it's what we do about it. You said that today you were going to be talking to a panel, was it? And that, but is this now happening tomorrow? What is that? And yeah, do you want to speak about how we impact wider society with your message
Mm.
as a result of the book?
So there are um, a few different approaches that government and state governments are trying to take to address some of these problems, and they kind of fall into two buckets. So one is legislation around delaying the age of social media, so setting either 14 or 16. But then there's another set of policy changes that some people are trying to bring forth, and that's actually been done in the UK, which is what's called the Age Appropriate Design Code. And what it's trying to do is to set standards that if you're going to have kids on your platform, then these need to be set with certain kinds of design features. So you can't have the infinite scroll, for example, things that are specifically designed to keep you on to platforms for longer than you want, autoplay on YouTube, or if your default setting is set to public, like set it to private. If you're a kid, you shouldn't have the whole world just being able to access your accounts. So that's what these design codes are being done. And that's so tomorrow I'm going to be testifying for in Vermont in the US, where they're trying to pass what's called the Vermont Kids Code. And it's trying to do exactly this. It's trying to set a new bar that it's like, okay, if kids are going to be using this platform, then we need to set certain standards, defaults. Um, the algorithms can't be set in the way that they currently are. And I do think that this is a real positive movement in the right direction.
Can that be tackled on a state by state basis initially, and then on a more macro global level? I think we're talking about enormous potential change here. And I guess the only way that we do make a massive difference here is by speaking directly to the platforms who have no interest commercially or otherwise in changing behaviors.
Yeah. So what's important to note is that they have and can change their defaults by geolocation. So you can say within this state, it has to follow these guidelines. So it can work. Now, ideally, we can do this at a federal level. But, in the US, the states have a lot of power and a lot of important work that they can do within their states. And so I'm all for whoever is trying to make these better.
And I guess then they become that test bed. They become a test bed that we all look to Vermont and we all say, okay, let's look in 2 to 3 years' time, 5 years' time. What was the impact on ill mental health among teens and suicidal ideation and self-harm and these things? And we can actually point to, okay, well, what changed? Something changed. Back to your point, something changed. I mean, that's fantastic. Good luck with that. I can't wait to hear Zach. I'm going to be looking at what, kind of what comes of that, and definitely going to be following. And please keep me updated with how that goes. One of the things that the book mentions is in the intro, I think it is, imagine waking up after a coma and the iPhone exists, social media exists. I saw somebody talk recently, a monk who he took a 4-year silence retreat called Geelong Tubton, I think his name is. I just want to get that right. He did his silence retreat. I think the years were it was something like 2005 to 2009 or 2006 to 2010, something like that. He literally is a walking case of. He went into this monastery without smartphones, without social media in the way that we know it, and came out, and he said it blew his mind. He's like, I couldn't. It was like something out of a film. Where
Wow.
I know I'm
That's
hoping.
so interesting.
I am hoping to talk to him for this.
I would love to watch that.
Can you imagine just that different, the difference between what it was and then what it is? It's that, California man, or was it Encino man in the US? That, you've just been chiseled out of the ice, and all of a sudden society is incredibly different. But yeah, I'll be talking to him about all of these things that we've spoken about today and more if that conversation happens.
So yeah, I know we're running to the end, so I just want to, make one point that I want to be really clear, and that's that what we're finding generally is that the biggest opponent that we're facing is not so much resistance to this idea, especially among parents and teens and teachers. The biggest opponent is resignation, a feeling that there's nothing that can be done. And, the train has left the station. Like I said before, the ship has left the harbor. My point and what the book is all about is that there are things that we can do. We can turn this around.
That's a really positive way of looking at it, because I think a lot of parents feel, I'm resigned to my child having a phone at 11. I'm resigned to social media impacting their lives in a negative way. I'm resigned to this, this discomfort, this unkind, all of the things we've just spoken about. That's a really incredible, powerful, and positive way to wrap this up, a hopeful way to wrap this up. And that's where I wanted to come to this. We come at this from as well. So, Zach, thank you so much for today, man. You've been incredible. I've loved going through the stats. I feel like I could talk to you for another 2 hours. We'll have to, if you're ever over here or I'm over there, we'll have to,
Yeah.
get together and, see how things are going. But no, good luck with the book. I mean, how long's it been out now? It's
been just about a week.
Yeah.
And
how you finding, like, have you had any sales data? Are we topping the the New York Times bestseller list yet? Where are we?
Yeah, we're doing good. I just saw today we're actually the number 1 on Amazon charts. So
as in number one.
Yeah, in the past week. So that's
Whoa,
really
the number
exciting.
1 book on all of Amazon right now.
So it's number 2. But we're number 1 on the most sold books in the last week. So that's really
incredible.
Exciting. And so here's the book.
There it is, The Anxious
The Anxious
Generation.
Yeah.
As I say, I'm listening. I'm most of the way through. I think 70-80% of the way through it. I think it's a fantastic listen, fantastic read. It's super important. I think as parents, let's not be resigned to our kids being unhappy. Let's not be resigned to future generations being unhappy, because I don't think we're going to, unless we do something, I don't think this changes.
And let's give it a shot.
Why not? Right? It's better than what, it's better than apathy and or just standing still. So, because these technologies aren't going to ask for less of people's attention unless we try to make something happen. So, Zach, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything.
Thank you so much,
we've gone through today, and good luck tomorrow.
Thanks.
Thanks. Cheers, Zach.
And there we have it. I told you it was a good one. I told you it was an important one. I stand by that episode. I'm incredibly proud of it. I think the work of Jonathan and Zach here is immense and important, and the research that they pulled together and made sense of is something that we all genuinely, I believe, need to consider. If you want to follow them, go to Jonathan Haidt, that's Haidt on Instagram, Twitter, Zach Rausch, Rausch on Twitter. I'm not sure if he's on Instagram, but either way, go follow them, go to their sites, go read what you can. Obviously, we talk about the PDF throughout. So if you haven't looked that up as we were talking, have a little look now. I'll have put the link in the description anyway. Follow us. subscribe, all of the good things, reviews, 5 stars are lovely. Thank you, please. And that's it from me until next week, when it's a slight change of pace versus this one. But again, was incredibly excited to get this one to you. It is the starting line for a reason. It's not just about who people are, why they are who they are. It's curiosity too. And starting line of, let's start talking about these things, these ideas, these concepts. Let's get some thinkers on. Thank you. Any guest suggestions, any thoughts, any concerns? Don't know, you shouldn't have any concerns. If you want to talk to me, hello@startinglinepod.com. Otherwise, goodbye. Forever. Actually, I always say that. I probably shouldn't say that on this one, shall I? Yeah, I said it. See you in a bit.